When a Sigma male suddenly loses interest in social games, it isn't random and it isn't a phase. It's a psychological shift. He reaches a point where he sees behind the curtain, the posturing, the competition, the subtle manipulation, the unspoken rules people follow just to be accepted. And once he notices the emptiness behind all of it, he steps out. Social games depend on mutual participation, on people caring about status, approval, and performance. But the Sigma stops caring. He stops responding. He stops playing. And the moment he withdraws his attention, the entire structure collapses for him. What others chase feels meaningless. What others fear feels irrelevant. His energy turns inward, toward purpose, growth, independence, and clarity. That shift is why he becomes unpredictable to some and intimidating to others, because he's no longer controlled by the rules they depend on. This loss of interest isn't bitterness or rebellion. It's evolution. He realizes social games take time, emotional bandwidth, and identity, and give nothing of value back. He sees how people exhaust themselves trying to impress those who don't matter, fight for positions that mean nothing, and argue for dominance that changes nothing in the real world. To a Sigma, this is wasted life. His path narrows and sharpens. He invests in relationships that feel real, environments that bring peace, and goals that require depth instead of performance. When he steps out of the social arena, he steps into authenticity. And most people don't understand that level of freedom because they've never lived without needing to be seen. If you've ever reached a point where social games felt draining instead of entertaining, ask yourself this: did you lose interest, or did you simply outgrow the people who needed you to keep playing? Comment "outgrown" if this resonates, and subscribe to Silent Wise for more insights into Sigma psychology. He realizes social games are built on ego, not truth, and he refuses to operate in illusions. A Sigma male reaches a turning point where the entire architecture of social behavior becomes visible to him, almost like watching a stage play from behind the curtains. He starts noticing how much of human interaction revolves around ego. People speaking not to communicate but to impress, competing for attention rather than connection, manipulating conversations to gain subtle dominance, and building identities out of performance instead of authenticity. Once he sees this clearly, he feels something shift inside him, a kind of internal disconnection, a quiet refusal to participate in something that feels fundamentally dishonest. He begins to recognize that most social games demand constant self-editing, strategic smiles, and controlled reactions just to maintain the illusion of belonging. And that realization becomes the very moment he steps away. He has no interest in trading parts of himself for the comfort of fitting in. Truth matters more to him than approval, depth more than attention, inner alignment more than external recognition. He watches the world with a sharper lens now. He notices how people switch personalities depending on who enters the room, how confidence inflates when praised and collapses when ignored, how conversations become battles for validation, with each person trying to outshine the other under the disguise of casual talk. To him, it all feels exhausting, a performance he never auditioned for. While others are busy climbing invisible ladders of status, he's questioning why the ladder exists in the first place. And when he refuses to climb, to chase, to be impressed, or to compete, the entire game loses its hold on him. His indifference becomes power because it reveals how fragile these social structures truly are. Games only work when everyone plays. The Sigma walks away, and suddenly, the game looks childish. He finds peace in the absence of illusion. In solitude, no one is performing. In silence, no one is pretending. He doesn't need to adjust himself to fit in. He simply exists as he is. And that authenticity becomes his anchor. It separates him from the noise, protects his energy, and sharpens his perception. He discovers that real connection doesn't require games, that truth never needs strategy, and that the more he refuses to engage in ego-driven dynamics, the more freedom he gains. Walking away isn't rebellion, it's clarity. And once he sees the difference between illusion and truth, he never returns to the stage. He sees how people shapeshift for approval, which makes the entire system feel fake. A Sigma male begins to lose interest in social games the moment he notices how dramatically people alter themselves just to be accepted. He watches as personalities twist and bend depending on who enters the room. Confident around the weak, submissive around the powerful, agreeable when they want something, dismissive when they don't. He sees the subtle shifts in tone, posture, humor, and opinion as people mold themselves to fit whatever will win them the most approval in the moment. And once he recognizes this pattern, he can't unsee it. What others consider normal social behavior looks to him like a constant performance, a marketplace of identities traded for validation. It feels artificial, it feels hollow, and most importantly, it feels beneath the life he wants to live. He refuses to dilute himself to fit into spaces where authenticity is optional. This shape-shifting behavior becomes even more obvious in group settings. He notices how someone who was humble in private suddenly becomes loud and competitive when there's an audience. How people laugh at jokes they don't find funny to avoid seeming out of place. How opinions change mid-sentence when someone higher in status disagrees. To him, this isn't social intelligence, it's self-erasure. And the Sigma has no patience for environments where people trade truth for belonging. He realizes these interactions aren't real, they're transactions. People don't say what they believe, they say what will keep them included. They don't act from identity, they act from insecurity. Once he sees this clearly, the entire structure of social life feels flimsy and insincere. The Sigma values inner integrity more than external acceptance. He refuses to shapeshift, refuses to rewrite himself for applause, refuses to mimic the emotional choreography others perform to stay liked. And because he stands firm in who he is, he becomes painfully aware of who doesn't. He doesn't judge them, he simply disconnects. He stops investing in conversations that feel scripted. He stops engaging in groups where people act rather than exist. He stops trying to find authenticity in systems built on masks. Social games lose their appeal because he no longer sees people, he sees performances. And he refuses to play in a world where everyone is acting, but no one is living. He recognizes that competition for attention drains energy he needs for his real goals. A Sigma male reaches a moment of clarity where he realizes that social groups operate like silent arenas, everyone subtly fighting for attention, validation, and dominance without ever admitting it. He watches how people raise their voices just a little louder when someone else gets praised, how they interrupt to reclaim the spotlight, how they shape stories to appear impressive, and how they subtly compare achievements as if life were a scoreboard. To most people, this is normal. To a Sigma, it's a waste of life. He begins to see that these micro-competitions drain something valuable: focus. While others spend their energy proving themselves, he wants to spend his building himself. Competing for attention feels like trading purpose for vanity, exchanging long-term growth for short-term ego boosts. And once he realizes this, he steps out of the ring entirely. He becomes aware of how much mental space is consumed by social dynamics, worrying about impressions, strategizing how to be perceived. It's exhausting, and he sees clearly that none of it moves him closer to the future he wants. His goals require solitude, discipline, and vision, things that cannot survive constant performance. Every minute spent trying to win socially is a minute taken from the projects, skills, and ambitions that actually matter. He understands something most people never learn. Attention is a currency with zero long-term value, But energy is priceless, so he safeguards his energy fiercely. When he chooses silence over competing voices, it isn't shyness, it's strategy. When he chooses distance over drama, it isn't avoidance, it's prioritization. The Sigma's path is internal, not external. He doesn't need the crowd to cheer before he makes a move. He doesn't need applause to feel worthy. His confidence is built in quiet rooms, not in noisy social circles. And the more he invests in his own direction, the more meaningless social battles appear. He no longer feels tempted to prove himself because he finally sees the truth. Attention grows and fades, but mastery compounds. Social games offer momentary recognition. Real purpose offers permanent transformation. Choosing between the two is not difficult for him. He walks away from competition not because he cannot win, but because winning would cost him the progress he values more than anything else. He outgrows environments where status matters more than authenticity. A Sigma male eventually reaches a stage where the environments he once tolerated begin to feel unbearably shallow. He notices how entire social circles revolve around status. Who has the spotlight, who gets the attention, who sits at the metaphorical center of the group. Conversations become competitions, gatherings become stages, and relationships become ladders instead of genuine connections. People aren't interacting, they're posturing. They aren't talking, they're performing. The Sigma sees how much energy is spent on maintaining appearances rather than developing character, and suddenly the environment feels too small, too artificial, too limiting for someone who values truth over image. When authenticity becomes rare and approval becomes the currency, he feels himself drifting away, not out of bitterness, but out of evolution. He no longer fits the script. He watches as individuals shape their behavior to fit whatever raises their perceived value. Someone gets louder to appear confident. Someone tells half-truths to appear successful. Someone attaches themselves to influential people just to elevate their own social ranking. He sees alliances formed not from trust but from convenience. Friendships built on superficial alignment rather than depth. Opinions adjusted to match whoever holds the most influence. In such environments, authenticity becomes a liability, something people hide rather than express. But for a Sigma, authenticity is non-negotiable. He cannot shrink himself to fit into spaces built on illusion. So he begins to detach, quietly and gradually, as his inner world expands beyond the limits of the setting he's outgrowing. This outgrowth feels less like a rejection and more like shedding a skin that no longer fits. The Sigma thrives in environments where intentions are clear, where people show themselves without masks, where connection is built on sincerity instead of hierarchy. He doesn't need to be the center, the leader, or the admired figure. He simply needs to be in spaces where he doesn't have to compromise who he is. As he outgrows status-driven circles, he discovers a deeper kind of fulfillment, the freedom to exist without performance. This freedom becomes a form of alignment, a sign that he's evolving toward a life guided by purpose rather than perception. And once he steps into that clarity, he can never return to places where authenticity is optional and status is everything. He stops responding to manipulation tactics, making social games lose their power over him. A Sigma male's detachment from social games becomes absolute the moment he stops reacting to manipulation. He sees the tactics others use: guilt-tripping, subtle pressure, emotional baiting, strategic compliments, passive-aggressive comments, forced competition, and instead of engaging, he simply goes silent. His lack of reaction doesn't come from avoidance, it comes from clarity. He recognizes these tactics for what they are: attempts to control his behavior, shape his emotions, or extract something from him. And once he refuses to feed these dynamics with emotion or attention, the entire structure collapses. Manipulation only works when someone responds. The Sigma's stillness turns every manipulator powerless. People who rely on emotional control begin to panic. Those who depend on his predictable reactions suddenly lose their leverage. And the social game that once tried to pull him in loses its grip the moment he stops playing. He understands that manipulation flourishes in environments where people care too much about approval. But he doesn't. That's what makes him dangerous to manipulators. There's nothing they can take from him, nothing they can guilt him into, nothing they can use to anchor control. When someone tries to provoke jealousy, he doesn't compete. When someone tries to create tension, he doesn't escalate. When someone tries to use silence as a weapon, his silence is stronger. This emotional sovereignty makes their tactics useless. The more they push, the more they expose their intentions. The more they attempt to provoke him, the more obvious their insecurity becomes. A Sigma watches this unraveling without needing to retaliate or confront. His lack of engagement is both a boundary and a revelation. Eventually, people stop trying to manipulate him because they realize it's impossible. Social games depend on emotional players, and the Sigma is no longer one of them. His withdrawal is not coldness, it is mastery. He chooses where his energy goes, who deserves his attention, and what dynamics he allows into his life. By refusing to respond, he removes himself from cycles that drain others for years. He becomes the one person manipulators cannot influence, cannot decode, cannot destabilize. And when a manipulator cannot control someone, they lose interest or collapse trying. In that collapse, the Sigma sees the truth. He was never part of the game. He was simply the mirror that revealed it. He understands that solitude gives him more clarity than any social circle ever could. A Sigma male eventually learns that the loudest rooms offer the least truth. Social circles pull at him from every direction. Opinions, expectations, subtle judgments, competitive tension, emotional noise, all of it mixing into a constant hum that drowns out his own inner voice. And while others depend on groups for identity, validation, and direction, the Sigma feels himself fading in those spaces. He realizes that clarity never arrives in the middle of conversation. It arrives in the silence after. Insight never comes from the crowd. It comes from the quiet moments when he is finally alone with his thoughts. So he steps back, not because he dislikes people, but because solitude sharpens him in ways no social environment ever could. Alone, he can see what matters and what doesn't. Alone, he can process experiences without interference. Alone, he can hear the truth beneath the noise of other people's projections. He notices how differently his mind works in isolation. Ideas unfold naturally. Patterns become visible. Priorities reorganize themselves without pressure or performance. In solitude, he reconnects with the parts of himself that get buried when he's surrounded by others. His intuition, his creativity, his sense of purpose. He feels his intelligence deepen, his emotional boundaries strengthen, and his internal world expand. What others call loneliness, he calls alignment. What others fear, he embraces as a source of power. Social circles may offer entertainment, but solitude offers evolution. And for a Sigma, evolution is everything. He also realizes that clarity is impossible when constantly absorbing the energy and emotions of others. People project their fears, insecurities, desires, and expectations onto the world around them. When he distances himself, he separates his identity from their noise. He stops confusing external influence with internal truth. This detachment protects him from being shaped by environments that value conformity over individuality. With every moment spent alone, he becomes more himself, sharper, calmer, more intentional. He sees what relationships are genuine, what goals are meaningful, and what paths are worth pursuing. And here is the quiet truth he never says aloud. Solitude is his teacher. It gives him direction when the world feels chaotic, strength when he feels drained, and insight that no group could ever provide. While others chase belonging, he chases understanding. and he finds it only in the silence where his thoughts no longer compete with anyone else's. He no longer needs validation, making him immune to the rules others live by. A Sigma male reaches a level of self-awareness where external validation stops holding any power over him. The opinions, approval, praise, and recognition that once shaped his behavior now feel irrelevant. Like background noise he no longer hears. This shift doesn't happen overnight. It builds quietly over years of watching how easily people get controlled by the desire to be liked. He sees how many conform to expectations just to avoid judgment. How many hide their real selves to fit into circles that don't deserve them. How many live small because they fear disapproval. And then comes his realization. The moment he stops needing validation is the moment he becomes untouchable. The social rules that bind others, impress, perform, compete, apologize, seek approval, no longer apply to him. He isn't playing for applause, so no one can manipulate him with the threat of losing it. This independence transforms the way he moves through the world. He no longer adjusts his behavior to please a crowd. He no longer says what others want to hear. He no longer bends his boundaries to avoid conflict. He trusts his judgment, honors his values, and follows his path even when it goes against what society expects. While others hesitate out of fear of what people will think, he acts from clarity. While others chase acceptance, he chases truth. And while others shrink themselves to maintain harmony, he stands firm in his identity without compromise. His detachment from validation gives him a rare kind of freedom. The ability to walk away, to say no, to remain silent, to be misunderstood without losing himself. And as he stops needing validation, something unexpected happens. People begin to respect him more. They sense the quiet self-possession, the unshakable confidence, the refusal to participate in approval-based dynamics. He becomes the person others watch, not because he demands attention, but because he is the only one in the room not trying to earn it. His immunity to social rules makes him unpredictable, unmanipulable, and deeply compelling. The world cannot pressure a man who draws his worth from within. And in that independence, the Sigma finds his greatest advantage: the power to live on his own terms, answer to no one, and build a life free from the invisible chains that govern everyone else. When a Sigma male finally steps out of the social games that once shaped the world around him, he isn't rejecting people, he's reclaiming himself. He stops living by rules built on ego, comparison, and approval, and starts living by principles that sharpen his clarity, deepen his purpose, and elevate his inner world. The moment he no longer needs validation, he becomes someone others cannot influence, predict, or control. And that's why his silence, his distance, and his refusal to play make him stand out in ways louder personalities never could. He isn't escaping society, he's rising above it. If this resonated with you, share your thoughts. When did you first realize you outgrew social games? Comment the word "evolved" if you connected with this message. And for more psychological insights, make sure you subscribe to Silent Wise, where clarity speaks louder than a noise.